Well, good evening, everybody. I'm showing that it's 7:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully you saw or you found that I did send you a PowerPoint as well as our agenda for tonight, but if you don't have it in front of you, that's okay. You just may want to pull it up at another time. So can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Well, good to see everyone tonight. Tonight we're going to have a little bit of fun, I hope. We're going to be talking about really how do you get a PLC started? What are those steps to make an effective PLC, and also what do you need to do to make it be sustainable? So specifically, we're going to talk about the 5 components, what I call the essential 5 for an effective PLC, and then specifically get into some detail about the first and most critical piece. So when you think about building a professional learning community, there are things that I call the essential 5 to making it work. The first one is casting the players. So there has to be some time and attention paid to how you put people into a PLC, how you engage them, etc. The second piece is what I call building the foundation. The third one is charting the path. The fourth one is operationalizing or creating a plan. And then the last one is catching the waves, which is how you sustain a PLC and keep it going. But before we get into that, one of the things that I wanted to kind of remind you guys about, hopefully you're somewhat familiar with Stephen Covey and his work in 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. But one of the challenges that I know many of us face is if you're thinking about starting a PLC, or even if you're already in one, how do you do the planning and spend the time needed to make it really, really effective? So I wanted you to think for just a minute about spending some time, and I'm borrowing from Covey, in that Quadrant 2 related to time management. So if you've read the works of Stephen Covey, or if you're familiar with them, Stephen Covey talks about how people are effective and how they manage their time. And he says that basically as teachers and educators and quite frankly as human beings, we spend our time in one of 4 quadrants. The first quadrant are those things that are urgent and important. So for example, this is a pretty basic example. If a building's on fire, that's pretty urgent and that's pretty important. So you need to take care of that and react. The other option is Quadrant 2, which is not urgent but is important. Quadrant 3 are those things that are urgent but not important. And then Quadrant 4 are those things that are not urgent and not important. And Covey's premise is that we should spend more time in Quadrant 2, which are doing those things that are very important, but they're not urgent. And that's where you really spend time reflecting and thinking and working. So just to kind of recap again, Quadrant 1 is for the immediate and important. So those are things that are like deadlines, or like today, the dean needed something from me, and because she's the dean and she's my boss, it was important and therefore urgent. Quadrant 2 is for more of the long-term strategizing and development that we need to do. So that is where you really spend some time planning and thinking and preparing, particularly for an effective PLC. Quadrant 3 are those things that are time-pressured distractions. So they're not really important, but somebody wants it now. So like I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and lots of times there are things that are not important, but she wants it right then and there. So we have to spend some time together in Quadrant 3. And then Quadrant 4 are those activities that yield little, and they really don't have a lot of value to us, but they're often used for taking a break. So, Facebook may be one of those not urgent, not important Quadrant 4 activities, but it is a way for us to take a break from the stress. Another way to look at it, if you think about Quadrant 1, that is sort of like firefighting. So that's where you deal with crises, pressing problems, or deadline-driven projects. Quadrant 2 is really that quality time where you can do prevention, relationship building, plan, and really create things that are going to be of lasting value. Quadrant 3 is really that distraction quadrant where you get mail, reports, interruptions. Like today I was in 4 different meetings, and I swear all of them were just in Quadrant 3. They really were not that important. They certainly weren't urgent, but we had to do it. And then quadrant 4 is where we spend time, honestly, wasting our time. So that may be some phone calls. It can be time wasters. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where a colleague just wants to suck the life out of you by talking to you forever. And all you can think in your mind is, this is nice that you want to talk to me, but I have 10,000 other things that I really need to take care of right now. But those are our time wasters that live in quadrant 4. So why am I talking to you about that? Because one of the most essential pieces to having an effective PLC is really putting it together and doing the pre-work and the pre-planning that needs to happen before you even start a PLC. And it's really, really difficult. Like I said, I was a high school principal. I was a principal for 16 years. I was an assistant superintendent, and I know what those daily demands are like. And 60-hour weeks were pretty much the norm for me. So how do you spend time in quadrant 2, where you're planning and you're thinking and you're creating and you're setting the groundwork for success? So what I want you to think about is, if you are in a position to start a PLC, or like I said, even if you're already in one, how do you carve out that very necessary time? So I'm going to give you a real life example. When I went to become principal of Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts, which you only can say that like that if you've actually been there, because it's a mouthful, in Dallas, I was an experienced principal. I had 11 years behind my belt. And on paper, it looked like it'd be a pretty simple, much easier, less stressful job for me. I had just left a very large high school of almost 3,000 students, and I was going to a high school that was only 900, so much smaller. The other part of it, too, was a magnet program, so the kids wanted to be there. It wasn't a compulsory attendance zone, et cetera. But I found it to be, and still would say, it was the most difficult job I've ever had. And if you guys have worked very much in high schools or with high school students, the joke, as a high school principal always was, the worst group to deal with were the cheerleader and the dance moms. Well, I had a whole school of cheerleaders, dancers, artists, actors, musicians, and 900 plus stage parents. So like I said, it was a real challenge for me. And one of the things that I noticed when I got there was the fact that there were no systems. I was used to going into schools where there were systems, maybe some you're going to tweak, some you're going to throw out, some you're going to create. But I never in my life had walked into a situation where there was not a single system in place. And as a result of that, the school was being run, quite honestly, by teachers and by parents. And nothing was systemic. So like I said, it was just a mess. It was so bad that I literally was working 6 days a week, 16-hour days, a constant revolving door of parents, students, teachers, and others who wanted something. I was really frustrated. And like I said, this was hard for me. As a former high school principal of a very large, diverse urban high school, I had dealt with everything from active shooters to suicide attempts to a teacher dying literally in a classroom, with children present. I thought, like I said, this should be a cakewalk. And I'll never forget, my boss said something that really stuck with me. I was sort of, bemoaning how difficult this was. And he said, you know what? He said, every single day, I want you to take 1 hour, and I want you to go somewhere in the building that nobody can find you. And he said, I want you to spend an hour just thinking, writing if that's, the way that you think, and just start putting ideas and thoughts and plans and stuff down on paper. Well, first of all, I thought he was crazy because I could not imagine carving out an hour. And secondly, I also didn't think I could find a place that, no way, my husband's giving me a hard time. No, they're fine. A place where nobody could find me because we were a very crowded building. So I literally ended up in our computer tech closet where the network server was, and I just put a little desk, a student desk, and a chair in there, and went for the first hour. And it became literally the most important time that I ever really experienced, quite frankly. And in doing so, I began to be able to really sort of lay out what were the problems, what were the obstacles, what were the barriers. And that quality time became absolutely essential. And, I'm proud of the fact that, just within 2 years, we have kind of completely turned the ship around and really had things in place. So spend time. Like I said, it's really important to think about it. But let's start first with, where did you begin with PLC? Well, obviously, a PLC is made up of people. And so I'm going to use an analogy, particularly since I worked in the arts environment and with lots of actors and thespians and directors and all that as a principal for many years. So let's think about, if you were casting a new show, how would you decide who should be your actors and players? So let's think for a minute about defining that cast. So how do you think you would determine what kind of people you need to have involved in your PLC for it to be most effective? So let me hear from you guys. How are you going to decide what kind of people you want?
It depends on what kind of PLC I want. Kind of like, okay. I would choose actors based on what kind of show it's going to be.
Okay. Other ideas or thoughts?
And the roles that you need to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of PLC, what kind of roles do we need to fill? What else?
Maybe a balance of different kind of personality types and stuff like that, because I would normally be drawn to pick people that are like me, but now I've learned, it's better to have a little bit of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to have all one personality type. Okay. There's a pretty critical group that you guys are not thinking about that are going to help drive your PLCs.
The audience.
I'm sorry, what?
The audience.
Yeah, the audience. Okay, so what's the purpose of your PLC, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish and do? Okay, one other critical group. So let's think about a new TV show is coming on. There's a pretty important person for a new TV show. Anybody know what that person's called? Or a new movie maybe coming out?
The producer?
Producer?
Yeah, the producer. Okay, so if you kind of carry this analogy out and you're thinking about it from a school perspective, I know in many school districts, I know, for example, in the Bossier schools, PLCs are now mandated. So you have to be really cognizant of that producer or that creator. So what is the expectation for PLCs from your principal or from your superintendent? Because they're going to do a lot of the driving and decision making around how you choose who's going to be a part of that professional learning community. Lots of times it's going to be set, so it may be the English department is a PLC or the third grade's a PLC, etc. There's also going to be other times that a PLC is going to be put together to deal with a particular issue or a particular plan. So I know my least favorite PLC that I ever got to lead was over textbook adoption. Not the most exciting thing you'd ever want to do, but it is pretty important, particularly, doing that in a district the size of Dallas, where you've got 155,000 students, and we spend a lot of money on textbooks. We had to have the right players there. But, quite honestly, I didn't get to choose who they were or what their roles or responsibilities were, because it was actually set for us by board policy. So you have to start, when you're thinking about your PLC, what are the expectations of the person who is right above you? So if it's a teacher PLC, what are the expectations of your principal? If it's a district level PLC, what's the expectation of the superintendent or the assistant superintendent or whoever it is? Because you can do some wonderful work. You can spend a lot of time and energy putting that together, but if it's not meeting the needs or the expectations of the producers or creators, then you're spending an awful lot of time that really can be wasted. So make sure that you spend some time on there. Okay? Other thoughts or ideas? How does that relate? We all good? Okay, y'all are being way too easy on me tonight. Okay, So as you're thinking about this PLC, and like I said, in an ideal world, if you got to be king or queen for the day, you could say, I want to have a PLC that is going to be made up of, and you get to pick each one of the individuals. So it can be that diverse group with different personality types, with different strengths, different weaknesses, etc. And then you can decide exactly what kind of work to work on. But in reality, that's not how most PLCs are formed or put together. Usually it's going to be the principal who says, here are our PLCs, or the superintendent will say that. Or it's something that is just derived sort of directly, I guess. So, it might be, like I said, let's use an elementary example. It might be the third grade teachers, their PLC. It might be all of the teachers in an elementary school who teach math. That could be another PLC. So the players are somewhat set for you. And in an ideal world, they're all willing and eager, and everybody's there to work, and it's going to be focused on students, etc. But I would venture to say that most PLCs do not function that way. You're going to have a cast of players that is varied and is also going to bring to the table their own biases, thoughts, etc. So I want to spend a little bit of time tonight thinking about how you deal with difficult and challenging people in a PLC. So has anybody had that wonderful PLC where everybody got along and the work just happened and you were highly successful? Has anybody had that experience? Okay, Anne-Marie, tell us a little bit more about it. What made it good? What was good about that?
Well, we were friends in and out of school. So there was six kindergarten teachers at my last school, and we had similar personalities, but some of us took more of a leadership role and some of us were the peacekeepers, and there was like a role for everybody, but we were all very similar in how we dealt with children and wanted to, we learned from each other and we shared ideas. It was just comfortable. Every now and then we'd have a blow up, and then right after I left, apparently I was the peacekeeper. They came to a head, and it was ugly, but for while I was there for several years, it was great.
Okay, yeah, and treasure that because, like I said, unfortunately, that's not the norm far too often. Okay, how many of you have had the opposite experience where you were a part of a PLC that you dreaded going to, it was not effective, etc.? Anybody willing to share?
So I've had both.
Okay,
I had a really good one, but my first year of teaching, it was the 3 7th grade science teachers. And one of the teachers, he would come to every meeting. He had a very odd teaching style. I'm pretty sure he didn't really actually teach the curriculum. And all he would do is talk and talk and talk in circles. I had no clue what he was talking about. And he would just hijack the conversation the whole time. And so then the other teacher and I would then meet another time separately to actually do the work we were supposed to do. Because we still needed that time. We needed to plan together and use each other, but we couldn't do it with him in the room.
Yeah, that's a very toxic person, and yeah, they can absolutely derail a PLC or any group. Okay. Anybody else? Any other types of personalities you've dealt with in those situations?
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay. I was just going to say that's kind of what I'm dealing with right now. I've had a really rough start to the year. Because I've had great PLCs in the past, and this year is the first year that I'm really struggling with the person and not sharing things with me, and I'm just really having to figure things out on my own, essentially. So it's been a struggle. So this is the first time, so I'm so glad I'm in this class because I'm soaking it all in to see, okay, let me grab all of these tools so maybe I can, help things, work a little bit better. But there is quite a bit of age difference there. And she's got many, many, many years of experience compared to mine. So there's just quite a bit of personality differences there. So I'm just glad to be in here and figure it out.
Yeah, well, if we had the magic bullet, I'd be making millions of dollars. I wouldn't be sitting here teaching y'all tonight. Not that I don't want to be here, but there's no hard and fast answer. But there are lots of things we can do, I think, that will help you. Okay, Mary, I think you wanted to chime in too.
Yeah, I worked in a PLC one year, and we would meet to talk about, student improvement, or like we had the same, it was all the teachers from the same grade.
Mhm.
And we had a lot of the students that we shared, but it would just turn into like this, let's complain about our students for an hour. Like that's all that we would end up doing.
Yeah.
Just and everyone, and then the people that could really have added value to the PLC conversation would get tired of it, so they would just start bringing stuff to grade, and they would sit in the meeting and just not talk and grade the whole time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen that happen one too many times. It's certainly talked about in our 5 dysfunctions of a team book. Catherine's dealing with that with Martin and all of those kind of things. Well, I'm going to bring in what, may sound like a little bit crazy, but, one of the ways that I think that you begin to deal with difficult people or people who either hog a conversation like Melissa was talking about and, monopolize it, or with Dan, people that just, sabotage what's going on and bring that toxicity, or like Mary said, that all it is becoming a gripe fest. So one of the ways that I think that you begin to deal with that is to use military tactics, because I call those kind of individuals terrorists. If you think about the definition of a terrorist, what's their main aim? Well, it's to disrupt, it's to cause pain, it's to keep people from accomplishing the goals and objectives that they want to accomplish, and it's to cause such substantial disruption that it absolutely derails and interrupts whatever's going on. So, I come from a long line. I've never been in the military, but my dad was a 20-plus year Air Force veteran. My husband's an Air Force veteran. My father-in-law is also an Air Force veteran, and then my son-in-law is an Army veteran. So I've been around the military for a long time, and worked for a superintendent who was also a West Point graduate and had been an Army Ranger. So like I said, military life is very comfortable, I guess, for me. So I'm going to start off by telling you a story, and I want you to think about how this relates to a PLC. So as I told you, my son-in-law Miles, was in the Army. He was an airborne ranger, and if you don't know what that means, it basically means he was an Army badass who jumped out of planes and helicopters and everything else into war zones. And, he did 2 tours of duty, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when he was in Afghanistan, one night I was just kind of going through YouTube and all this kind of stuff, and I kept seeing these videos pop up of soldiers in combat. So I typed in his unit name, and the next thing I know, I am watching a live YouTube video of my son-in-law in a firefight in Afghanistan. And his particular role, he was what they call a forward operating specialist. And I guess the easiest way to explain that role is, if you've ever watched movies, the guy that has the radio, the backpack like radio thing, and they're calling in for air support, or, they need help, or here's our location, whatever. That's what Miles did. He was a forward operating specialist.
Salt? No. Hey. Shake it.
Casey.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I thought you were talking to me. I was like, yeah. It's all right. You're fine. Don't worry about it. So anyway, I'm watching this YouTube video, and at first I wasn't sure it was actually his unit until I hear them calling his name. And like I said, it's live fire. It's very stressful, and pretty scary, quite honestly. But then that part of me that is an analyst and loves data and all those kind of weird things started really watching how these soldiers were handling this life or death situation. And, they were relying on each other. There were clear roles. There were very clear responsibilities. They had done this enough that it had become almost muscle memory, that they didn't have to stop and think about what to do. And in this particular fight, they were on the top of a building, and they would literally, it was almost like synchronized swimming, where 2 or 3 soldiers would come up and fire while others would duck down, and they was sort of this really interesting, intricate dance. And I remember thinking, here we have people in a true life or death situation. But at the same time, they were functioning very much like the perfect team, and highly effective professional learning community. They had trained together. They had created norms and roles and responsibilities. They knew how to respond instinctively, and there was nobody who could or would derail them, because if they did, it would mean literally death to them. So if you think about how do you deal with highly difficult, challenging people, and you go to that sort of military idea, I'm suggesting to you that you have to deal with and think about planning an effective PLC from a tactical standpoint. So if you research military tactics as well as tactics for first responders, there's some pretty common things that have to happen, okay? So if you think about a tactical standpoint, there has to be pre-planning, there has to be engagement, and there has to be forethought. You know, we don't just, gather 20 or 30 men and women, hand them guns, drop them off in a war zone and say good luck. They spend hours and days and weeks and months rehearsing, practicing, drilling, and training, because that tactical piece is so important to them. The second thing that they do in the military and first responders as well is they do things at an operational level. So prior to going into a battle, or, right now there's a lot of discussion, as we all know, about North Korea and our response and all of that. But, behind the scenes, you've got people who are planning, what is the mission? What is the objective? What is the campaign going to look like? And then how do we map that out from a blueprint perspective? So when my son Miles got home, thankfully, safely from Afghanistan, one of the things I asked him was, it was very scary to watch that. It was horrifying, but at the same time, it was incredibly affirming and made me very proud. And I said, how do you guys get to that point? And how did you know that when you're sitting there on that roof, there was going to be a firefight, et cetera? And he talked about how critical that operational piece was and how much time that they had spent prior to going into these really highly dangerous situations, planning and talking and discussing and thinking about it. We tend to go into a meeting or a PLC and just kind of all show up. If we're lucky, there's an agenda and we're going to do some work. But we really don't think about or operationalize how we're going to handle the meeting, how we're going to plan for it, how much time we're going to spend on each task, what tools and resources and materials do we need, what do we need to know prior to that, creating that sort of operational plan. The other thing that the military focuses on that makes them highly effective is what we call that strategic level. So again, they don't just show up and, they make sure they have guns, they make sure they have ammunition, and, they make sure they have all their pieces. How often do we go into a PLC where we don't have the right data, we don't have the right information, or we bring things that really aren't useful or helpful? There has to be time thinking about what is that strategic piece that we really need. And then the last piece we have to think about to deal with difficult people and creating that really cohesive, effective PLC is the politics. I'm going to give you a real concrete example. So going back to my time as principal at Booker T. Washington, there were a group of 5. They happened to be males, so, I'm not trying to be gender, do something wrong here, but that's what they were. They were 5 fathers, and nobody in the school liked them. In fact, literally my secretary, if they would call or one of them would show up, you could almost literally see her cringe. They were unliked, they were not popular, but they wielded a lot of political power. And so one of the things that I had to really think about was, yes, I could have just told them, look, you can't be here, you can't do this. I could have given them all, and I had the authority, I was the principal, to disengage them from the community. But I also realized pretty quickly that they yielded a lot of political power and influence, not only within the school, but within the community and within our school district. So, you know, a lot of times when we're thinking about dealing with difficult people, we fail to recognize or appreciate the political fallout that they can bring upon us. So you have to know your people. And quite honestly, the military thinks about that. You know, they have a whole communications piece, and the way that the media is addressed, et cetera. So as you're thinking about your PLCs and you're thinking about dealing with those difficult people, think about it from a tactical level, an operational level, a strategic level, and that political level. So if, one of those people that's very difficult in your PLC happens to be the superintendent's wife, you might want to think a little bit differently about how you're going to deal with that person than if it's somebody who doesn't have any political clout. Okay? So, I want you to think for a minute about your PLCs and what are some of those political parameters or political influences that you really need to think about. So without, getting yourselves in trouble by naming names or whatever, what are some of those political landmines that you've got to be aware of?
Well, if you're trying to move into administration and you've got people who are quote unquote connected to the people above you, then you have to be careful to not create any kind of impression that you're not cooperative, that you're not willing to learn, and you're not willing to also share and participate in a productive way. And so you have to be, mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to know your players, and you've got to know their connectivity. Okay. Other ideas or thoughts?
Besides moving up to administration, you got to think about those people that the school loves.
Yeah.
If you're having to work for someone outside of your department, then if everyone loves them, and if you come across offensive or standoffish or combative, then other people might go to their side. So.
Yeah, Casey, you and Jim both are absolutely right. It's not only their connectivity, but it's also their reputation and the way that they're perceived by the faculty. If you are a PLC leader, a team leader, department chair, principal, assistant principal, whatever, and you go after the most beloved member of the staff, and granted, they may be the most ineffective teacher, they may, all of those things, but you're creating your own political landmines. I'm not saying you don't address it, but I think you just have to be thoughtful and know what you're going up against. One of the things when I would coach principals, I would always tell them is this a hill you're really willing to die on? And if you're not really willing to die on this hill and it could end your career, then, maybe you need to rethink this. So again, it's not a matter of ignoring it. It's just a matter of being thoughtful about how you approach it. Okay? So Catherine spent some time those first 2 weeks at her new company, the new tech company, doing what I would call intelligence gathering. So she spent time looking and thinking and talking about, what's going on, what is this organization. Guys, it's really critical that you get to know your team members and get to know them on a personal level. So, one of the first things that I would encourage you to do in a PLC is to spend some time. You can use those assessments that we've done to learn about each other's personalities, but also to do some team building activities. It's a lot harder to be ugly or contrary in a meeting, when, you know each other really well than if you don't. So that is important. The other part of it too is that you really have to think about and spend some time preparing for the worst. So what I mean by that is this. One of the jobs that I had as an assistant superintendent was we got to present before the board. And I make that sound like that's such a privilege. It was the least favorite part of my job, particularly in Dallas, because we had a very contrary, politically charged, love to make us look bad school board. And so what we would do in preparation is we would do mock school board meetings. And, it was kind of fun. It was a way to get all your aggressions and all those kind of things if you were playing the role of a board member. And we would ask the most difficult, challenging, impossible questions of the person who was presenting so that we could be prepared. So if you're dealing with someone who is very challenging and difficult, find a critical friend or find a colleague, or, you know, do it with your dog or in front of the mirror. There's a million different ways, but really practice how you're going to respond. So much so that it becomes instinctual as opposed to reactive. You know, I'll give you an example of a time that I was not at my best. We had this particular teacher who I did not like. I was an elementary principal. I found him to be loathsome. I thought he was gross. I thought he was an ineffective teacher, and I literally could not stand him. And one day I mentioned something to him. It was pretty minor in the hallway, and his response back to me was how the parents were at fault, that these were the world's worst kids and all this, and it literally went all over me. And instead of handling it professionally and using those tricks and tools I knew to deal with difficult people, I reacted. And it got really ugly. And thankfully, I had a great teacher who saw my ugly reaction and, you know, basically me telling him off and how ineffective he was, and he was the world's worst teacher and kinds of other things that I didn't need to say. She literally came and interrupted and pulled me away. That's what you don't want to have happen. And that was a great life lesson for me as a leader. You know, I anticipated dealing with those people that were difficult and challenging to me. And I in my head, created every scenario and every excuse that I knew that they would come up with. And then I would practice how I would respond. You know, it sounds kind of silly, but, you know, if you've ever been around someone who, you know, is an actor or something like that, they do lots of rehearsals in front of the mirror. It's the same kind of idea, because you'd rather get it wrong and get to redo it in that practice mode versus in real life. So, moving right along, the other way that you can deal with difficult people is to understand their frame of reference. So, you know, all the time I say context matters. It matters especially when you're dealing with really challenging and difficult personalities. So you have to know where they're coming from. So Dan, you know, you've got a really seasoned teacher, you said, that's difficult and a lot older and, you know, doesn't want to do all these newfangled things, or, you know, whatever their excuses are. You know, I think one of the ways that you can deal with that is ask yourself, where are they coming from? You know, for teachers who've been around a long time, they've seen, you know, the program du jour, you know, the 32 different programs that come and go, and, you know, and some of them are effective, most of them are not, and this too shall pass. You know, I've outlived however many principals, however many new programs, I'm going to outlive this one too, so I'm not going to spend time and energy. So just kind of, you know, ask them some questions, you know, and figure out where they're coming from. Also, to be careful that you don't set up a winner-loser sort of scenario. Going back to Covey, you know, always think win-win. How can we engage everybody in a positive way? How can we use, you know, that person who has been around a long time and their knowledge base and their historical perspective? How can we leverage that to bring them in? And also, too, if you can, figure out what have been their previous experiences with change. You know, change is hard. We know that. But, you know, if they've had a really bad experience with something new, where they were, you know, discredited or whatever, you can do a lot to build them back up and get them involved. You know, one of the things that, you know, I know worked really well for me was when I had those really seasoned teachers that I think I decided, and, you know, it's just one of those gut reactions, they had a good heart. I put them in leadership roles. You know, people thought I was crazy. But the fact that they felt like they were being valued and their expertise meant something completely changed their attitude. Now, there have been others that didn't work with, but, you know, sometimes you will see there is a glimmer in there. If we really spend some time bringing that out and recognizing what they bring to the table, that'll go a long way and help too. The other thing that you can think about doing too is minimizing the impact of those negative people. Never confront them in a meeting, because they love nothing more than to have an audience, because, you know, they're going to put you in your place kind of thing. So, you know, shut it down as quickly as you can, but then talk to them privately later. That'll make a big difference. And also be willing to be courageous. I think about in the book where, the CEO calls Catherine about some of her decisions, and, she thinks he's calling to support her, and it's really to question her. It took a lot of courage to stand up to her boss and say, look, you've just got to trust me, and here's what I'm trying to do. Also, don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations, guys. I called them, I did 10 minutes, my previous name was Fraley, 10 minutes with Mrs. F. And I scheduled 10-minute meetings with everybody on my staff. I had almost 300 people at one point under me, but it was time well spent. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the entire PowerPoint. You guys can read and all of those kind of things. But guys, bottom line, if you look at some of these resources and sort of internalize them, like I said, I wish I could give you a prescription and say, do this, do this, do this, do this, and everybody's going to be happy camper, and you're going to have the greatest PLC ever. Unfortunately, everybody's different. Every situation is different. But bottom line, I don't need to talk, and you guys might want to mute. Okay. I think if somebody is maybe on the phone, I'm going to mute them. Okay. All right. So anyway, follow your gut instincts. Trust your instincts. Don't just be passive and let it continue. It's sort of like if you've got one toxic person in a group, they will spoil the entire group if you let them. But again, it doesn't have to be confrontational in front of everybody else. It can be behind the scenes. You can sometimes move them into places where they're going to feel more valued and will help you. The other part of it too to think about is that, most teachers, I would venture to say, I used to believe it was 100% of teachers, and then I met those one or two that it wasn't true for, but, everybody wants to do the right thing. They want to make kids successful. They want to be successful. They want their school to be successful. And you have to tap into that piece of it. But I gave you guys like 5 different articles in Moodle that give you some really specific strategies on dealing with those challenging and difficult people. Because they are out there, and you have to address them in various ways. Okay, so instead of me lecturing you all night, tell me what questions or ideas or ponderings or complaints or whatever do y'all have tonight.
I had a question.
Okay, yeah, hey Sharon.
Just thinking about toxic people, what do you do if your leader is kind of that toxic presence where I feel like the members of our school have it together, but the leader is bringing the chaos, where it's hard to be confrontational and say what you really want to say because they're your boss. So I'm like, oh, wow, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I retired is what I did when I encountered that. Unfortunately, guys, that's the reality a lot of times. I think what you have to do is start first with information and data. So, if you can show them, here's what we're doing, here's why it's succeeding, here's the metrics that back me up. It's pretty rare that you're going to find a leader who doesn't want their school to do well. And if you can show them hard and fast facts, a lot of times they'll back off. But don't be afraid to confront them. Not in a real aggressive sort of way. But, I always go to questioning. I'm a firm believer, if you've ever done coaching, just asking those strategic questions, and maybe it should start with, what is it that you want us to accomplish? How do you define success? What can I do to make you look like a superstar? But really invoking that dialogue to sort of pull out where they're coming from and those kind of things. And if they still continue to be toxic, then you do your best job of working around them and in spite of them. At the end of the day, and I used to tell my teachers this all the time, if you get the best results for your school or, the best results in the parish or whatever, people are going to leave you alone, even the most toxic people. So it's a matter of creating a situation where you really can improve what's happening for your students. And Sharon, I don't feel like I really answered your question at all, but. like I said, I think I would just start with some dialogue and some, and just a real open-ended conversation where, and usually toxic leaders are very narcissistic. This has been my experience. So I'd want to know what it is that they want from me. What is their goal? Do they want to be the superintendent? That's finally, quite honestly, I had a very toxic boss, my last boss. One of the most narcissistic humans I've ever known in my life. And the way that I finally kind of got through to her was I went into her one day and I said, if you will let me do what I need to do, I know you want to be the superintendent of our school district, and I can make you look like a superstar. And I somehow found that entry into her psyche. And then I went out and produced the results. And it did make her look like a rock star, because I told everybody it was because of her wonderful leadership and coaching and all, that kind of stuff that got me there. But it worked. So like I said, you just got to figure out what makes people tick and then play into that. It's sort of like being the best used car salesman on the face of the planet. How do they get you to buy a car? They figure out what you want. They use all those hidden clues, and it's the same kind of thing. Other questions? Y'all are just making my life way too easy.
You didn't actually answer her question all the way, but you kind of answered mine.
Okay.
Because I was similar to what you're saying, but in my case, the person who is over me, one of them, or maybe two, are not actually like certified or have the proper credentials to supervise me. And sometimes I feel like you want me to know that you feel that you're smarter than me or you know more than me, so you try to come up with extra stuff when I know that I know more and I am, so it makes it kind of difficult, like, to get through the day if you come and observe me and your script versus a certified person's script is totally different. Your focus on tedious things is not necessary,
Yeah, and unfortunately that is happening more and more in education, where we have people who are not certified and are supervising others who know way more than they do. So I think it comes down to sort of a twofold or two-pronged approach. Number one, I'll go back to what I said to Sharon, figure out what makes them tick and play into that. And then the other part of that is through very, I hate to use the word because it sounds so negative, but almost manipulative coaching. You've got to teach them what they need to know. So for example, there are a lot of people who come in and observe teachers, and they're looking for things like, is your class, are the students all sitting quietly in their desks, or, what's the bulletin board look like, or whatever. And we all know that that's not really effective. It doesn't make teachers better. It doesn't, improve student achievement. Compliance has never led to excellence in any system. So I think you kind of have to take a step back and, simple things like sharing with them, hey, well, I found this great article. I thought you might enjoy it. Gosh, I don't know how to do this. What ideas and suggestions do you have? But again, it's just creating that relationship with people where you understand their frame of reference, where they're coming from, and then you do things within the scope of your ability to move them along. Like I said, I'll go back to that used car salesman sort of thing. In fact, I used to, my principals, when they were brand new principals, I'm like, I want you to this Saturday go to the used car lot, and I want you to observe what happens. And I want you to pay really close attention to the way that used car salesman addresses you and how they guide you towards a particular car and all that. Because, used car salesmen that are effective, they are experts at reading us. You have to become a great and keen observer of others. So not only what they say, but their body language, context in which they say it, etc. And then, guys, like I said, I think we as humans have almost an innate ability Once we spend that time in observation and finding out what makes people tick, in what situations they're going to respond a certain way, then we find ways to, like I said, manipulate is such a negative word, but you do manipulate the situation and you will learn how to control the response. The other piece of it too is, guys, the one thing that you absolutely can control is your own response. So when you have that less qualified, less intelligent, less experienced person telling you what to do, if you become defensive, their guard's going to go up and it's going to become, worst case scenario, it'll become confrontational. Best case scenario, neither one of you are communicating anymore. So if you focus on yourself and, your response, that'll go a long way to mitigate and resolve the situation. Okay. Other questions, guys?
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
I thought that was very helpful because it kind of opened my eyes, saying to observe, because I feel like I didn't have time to really get to know my team member. I was just kind of thrown in there, so I couldn't figure out, what made her tick or what, how to relate to her in any way. And just felt like bombarded with, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that, don't do this, don't do that, you can't do it this way, you walk down the hall this way, you come this way, and I'm like, oh, and it was just real frantic. So that really makes sense that, I was just kind of thrown in there without knowing, the personality, that you were going to be working with. So that just kind of opened that to me.
Well, thank you. And guys, one of the things that we are so guilty of in education is we're so task-oriented. We've got this and this and this and this and this we've got to do. And so we're just going to direct everybody to do it a certain way. But if we would back up and going back to, my first year as principal at Booker T. Washington, one of the things that the superintendent told me when he hired me, because they paid me a ridiculous amount of money to run this really small school. And in Texas, your salary as a principal is usually based on the size of the school is one of the big factors. And I said, okay, I get, all the achievement metrics and all that, but there's a reason. What is it you really want me to be able to do? And he said, I want you to get those people to quit calling me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And the previous year, they had over 2,000 parent complaints go directly to the superintendent. Now, in a big district like Dallas, that means that there was probably another 2,000 plus that went to the executive director and, on down the layers, including to the principal. And 2 years later, when I was named the principal of the year for the district, the superintendent told the school board, he said, I want you to know what Tracy's really accomplished. In 2 years, we went from 2,000 plus just in my office, at the highest level down to 3. And he said those 3 parent complaints, 2 of them were from the same parent, and it was actually a board policy they were upset with. It had nothing to do with the school. So we really only had 1 complaint. And the way that I did that was, honestly, I spent an entire year, and I'm not exaggerating, where all I did was listen, observe, and talk to people. And I went to every possible event, but, and at the time I thought, gosh, I'm just not, I'm not accomplishing anything because I'm a very task-oriented, goal-oriented kind of personality. But taking that step back and really listening, guys, and not listening to respond, but to really listen and understand, and to use all of those psychology tools that we all learned back in Psych 101, really made a huge difference. And, I remember 5 years later, I was in my office one day and I just kind of looked around. And I called my secretariat and I'm like, something's wrong. She said, what do you mean? I said, we haven't had anybody coming in mad or upset. We haven't had parents banging down the door over this, or that. I said, in like 3 months. And it was just that moment when I realized that time on the front end, listening, observing, seeking to understand, and not just seeking to be understood, but really seeking to understand, completely changed the culture of our school. I mean, literally 180 degrees. So if you think about spending that time, that's why I talked about Quadrant 2 and Covey tonight, and do those pieces. It may seem like time wasted, But in the end, if you can accomplish that piece, all those other things will happen really quickly. But if you don't do that on the front end, you get bogged down in the middle because there's conflict, there's dissonance, there's misunderstanding, there's miscommunication that can completely derail what you're trying to do. So like I said, no magic bullet. I wish I had that prescription, that list. Do these 5 things and life's going to be grand. It really is all about truly getting to know each other and respecting each other and creating trust with each other and appreciating, valuing each other. And on the rare occasion, when you have someone who is not salvageable, the team needs to address that. Not just an individual, the team. You know, I'll give you one last example and then I'll shut up for the night. But, you know, I had a very, very ineffective math teacher. I mean, she was really, bless her heart, she couldn't teach her way out of the box. And, you know, I was documenting her. We were trying coaching her. We brought in experts. We'd done everything we knew how to do. And my department chair came in before their weekly PLC and she said, Tracy, how much do you trust me? And I'm like, Sue, I trust you implicitly. What are you talking about? She said, that's all I need to know. Well, I found out the next morning that the team confronted this teacher. And in a very nice professional way, but they said, you're not carrying your weight. You know, we're having to pick up the pieces. And they went through all these pieces and they said, you know, it's not that you're a bad person. It's none of this, but you don't fit in our team. And so we're going to help you in any way we can to find a new team, a new school, a new place to go. She resigned on the spot. And like I said, I'd been trying for a long time to push her out. But when you have a really effective team and you want to affect a change with a toxic person, tell me that's not powerful. That's what a real PLC can do and accomplish. And as a leader or as a member, we can begin to cultivate that sort of environment that those conversations happen. I've talked way too much tonight. I apologize. Any other questions about what we've talked about tonight? Anything else? Assignments, group work, projects?
The slides.
The what? I'm sorry?
The PowerPoint.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so we have our crosswalk. We've done our crosswalk.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting our standards down. So on the slides, is that more just responding to the questions and discussing them, or do you want these standards related to the slides?
No, you can just go through and answer the questions, and then I think it's questions 4, 5, and 6 where it talks just a little bit about the standards. Just pull 2 of the standards and pop them in there, and then give me just a little bit of discussion because I want to make sure you really understand how it all relates. Okay, so a standard's not just something you read. There has to be action tied to it for it to be implemented effectively.
Okay.
Yeah, again, guys, you know, I know that I'm a stickler about grammar and stuff like that, but, you know, I just want to make sure you understand because these are all tools that you can take out and hopefully use, you know, and if not, then just don't tell me because I'd be sad. Anything else? Hey, you guys are way too easy. I appreciate it. Well, it's 8:29, so I'm going to give you back a whole minute tonight. Oh, Mary, go ahead.
This doesn't have to do with, well, it has to do with what we were talking about, but I was wondering, where is the PowerPoint for tonight's meeting?
I put it a couple of places. It's in, I attached it to in the news forum, so you should be able to find it there. And then I also put it in, if you go into module 3, I've added a new folder today that says new, and that's where I dump the resources and stuff. So it should be both places. And if you still can't find it, email me and I'll email it to you.
Yeah, because the PowerPoint's not in that folder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and they were doing some maintenance today on Moodle, so I may have dropped it in there when they were doing the maintenance and it didn't take, so I'll reload again tomorrow.
Okay, I'll get it from there then tomorrow.
But yeah, if you can't find it, just email me.
Okay, great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Also, someone has a question in the chat. Oh, you got it.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for them to type. Switch standards. Okay. Oh, so in terms of the PowerPoint, again, it's just giving me, the question is the PowerPoint, which standards may obtain using PLC as a structure? There's a lot of standards. Do I want you to list them all? No. No, 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 no. Give me 2 examples. So for example, you may say, we chose, I don't know, pick one. National Teacher Board Standard, blah, blah, blah. And the way that it would be addressed, it's going to be addressed by our departmental PLC. And what we're going to do in our PLC is we're going to unpack the standard and do a unit plan. All I want, guys. Okay? So like I said, don't make it too complicated. Okay? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and the recording. So thank you, guys. It was great to see everybody. And a couple of you had questions about grades and stuff. I've got everything graded. I just need to load the grades, so I'll do that probably either tonight or first thing tomorrow. So if something comes up weird, because like I'll grade something and it'll show up somewhere else as a 0. I don't know what's going on, but I'm having to go back and manually override this. I'm doing the cleanup. So if you don't see grades, give me till midnight tomorrow night. If you don't see them, then just pop me an email or something like that, or text me, and I'll get it all straight for you. Okay? All right, guys. Thank you. Have a great rest of the evening. I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.